All right, so let's jump right in. I want to take you somewhere. I want to take you into the woods. And so imagine you are hanging out with some of your friends and you're walking along, and then all of a sudden you realize you're lost and you're in the woods and it's kind of getting dark outside. What if you hear up ahead some crackling, some like the wood branches starting to shuffle together and crunch? What do? Well, subconsciously, before you've even had a chance to think about it, your brain jumps to, uh-oh, goes into survival mode. Your hands start to get a little bit sweaty. Your heart starts to race. We are wired as human beings to essentially overreact to periods of uncertainty. And that certainly is a period of uncertainty. To think, could that be? I mean, it could be a bunny rabbit. It could just be the wind has moved some branches around, but your brain is wired to go into survival mode and to react in a way that says, there's something out there and it's here to kill me. So let's double down on that a little bit and say, hey, you weren't with your friends. Now let's imagine that you're all by yourself out there, right? That heightens. Well, the reason that I bring that up is a couple of things. First of all, we continue to be in a period of uncertainty. And as a result, that uncertainty is a crazy maker for our brains, and it's driving us in certain circumstances to overreact, because essentially that's what's kept us alive as a species for the last billion years or however long it's been. But number two is, as a sales professional, imagine that you can predict or actually read the minds of the people that you're selling to. Like, wouldn't that be super helpful to be able to read the minds of the people you're selling to? Well, as it turns out, in today's environment, you absolutely can. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, with that whole concept in mind of the fact that we can actually read the minds of our buyers right now because we're all thinking about the same things. Today, what we're going to focus on is this concept of sales empathy. And I'm going to take you behind the scenes into some behavioral and decision science around how we as human beings buy, how we decide, and how we prioritize. So if you're ready, so am I. Let's dig in. All right, to start, let's focus with how we empathize with people. So I want you to think about, in your own personal circumstances, what do you do as an individual when you're faced with a personal downturn? And what I mean by that is like personal recession, or an uncertainty about how much money you're going to make, or the stability of your role, or whatever it happens to be. What do you do as a person? Well, I'll bet you there's three things primarily you do. Number one is that you look at all of your discretionary spending, or the kind of nice to have stuff, and you think, all right, do I really need this? First example is we were driving by a furniture store and my wife was like, gosh, we could really use another couch. But then we both looked at each other and were like, but our current couch can wait, right? Like our current couch is fine for now. A new one can certainly wait. Thinking about personal trainers or any of those types of things, a nice new car, we're going to deal with the things that we have and reduce discretionary spending. Number two thing that we're probably doing is looking at our essentials. So what are the things that we need to survive, the things that we need to get by? And number one, look to get the prices down on those. And number two is really collectively look at extending our runway. So to make sure we've got enough in case worst case happens. And then again, extending our runway also applies to our own cash flow position. So what can we do to make sure we've got everything we need, but the money to be able to survive and support that? And then number three, of course, is to reduce risk. So to look at the worst case scenario and then take a step back and go, all right, what are the things that I can do or we can do as a family or as a group to ensure that worst case doesn't happen? So what can we do to protect ourselves against that? So when we think about that, reducing discretionary costs, getting rid of them essentially, looking at your essentials, extending your runway on those and getting the cost down. And number three is reducing risk. Guess what? If that's what you do, that's also what the people that you're selling to are doing too, not only in their personal lives, but in their business lives, right? So as businesses, every single business has spent the last 6 to 8 weeks focusing on each one of those exact three things. That could be to your advantage to know that in an upswing, when the economy is booming, gosh, we could be spending money on all kinds of things. But in a downswing, it's only a couple of things. It's not discretionary. It's focusing on the essentials and extending your runway and reducing risk. So with that in mind, let's think about this idea of sales empathy and how buyers buy, decide, and prioritize. There's essentially three things that I want to take you through that are going to help you not only today, but they're going to help you for the rest of your career, because as it turns out, neuroscientists have pretty much pinpointed how we make decisions, how we buy, how we decide, how we prioritize. So these are things that hopefully you can take with you for the rest of your career, but they're so important right now. Number one is we as human beings are wired to resist being sold to. I mean, imagine going into a department store and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can I help you find something? What do? It's not like you were outside consciously planning to share where you are in your buying journey. You probably said, no, thanks, I'm just looking, right? So subconsciously, we are wired to resist being sold to. Somebody rings your doorbell and you look out at your video doorbell, like your Ring or your Nest Cam, and you see that they're holding a clipboard. What do? You probably close the shades and pretend that you're not home. We are wired to resist being sold to or unduly influenced. Number two is that we make all of our decisions in the feeling or emotion center of our brain, which is the limbic, which is in the middle. And we only really use logic to back up those feeling decisions. So a lot of times when we lead with logic, we lead with ROI, we lead with data, we lead with case studies, we're actually polarizing a consensus audience, and that we need to be more focused on telling stories and evoking feelings and emotions, which actually draws people together. And the third of the big three is transparency sells better than perfection. And you're probably not surprised that I'm saying this. However, it is exactly the reason why we all look at reviews before we make a purchase. 96% of us do when we make a purchase that we haven't bought before, that's of medium to high consideration, meaning it's not a pack of gum. And we are wired to actually look at the negative reviews first. 4 out of 5 people do that. It's about 82%. We'll skip past the 5s and go right to the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s. Why is that? Well, that's when a website is acting as a salesperson, but we as human beings are actually wired to try to predict what our experience is going to be like, which is why we do that. But it absolutely applies to the way we sell in a human-to-human or B2B environment. So let's go through the three, all right? So if you're ready, let's dig in and start with number one. All right, the first one of the big three is that we are wired to resist being sold to. And what that means, like I said before, is when you walk into a department store, you are actually trying to avoid the salespeople. You're not ringing, you're not answering the door when there's a door-to-door salesperson, right? Once we feel like we are being sold to, our defenses go up. We filter every word that comes through, that goes into our limbic, right through the ears, right in the middle of our brain. We filter it when we feel like we don't trust the person because they're there to potentially unduly influence us. So in today's world, that's even more important, because if you're trying to prospect to executives, whether they're VP level, C level, what have you, they've got a lot on their mind right now. And they are actually resistant to being sold to when they think about things like looking at their email inbox. So what I want to do is, as a recent chief revenue officer and a former SVP of sales a number of times, I want to just give you some insight into the way that executives look at their work prioritization. So the first thing as a C-level executive that I care about, and most of the executives in my organization that I've known care about, is we care first about our team, our prospects, and our customers. Those are the first three, right? So especially like if I'm looking at my email inbox, those are the first three things that I'm going to look for and try to be responsive to. If it's something to do with my team, my customers, or my prospects. Then there's another whole group here that's things like my boss, my internal peers, my board, my investors, could be partners, it could be former coworkers. They all kind of fall into this prioritization list. But here's the amazing thing. If you look at the first 13, guess what's not in there? Unknown potential vendors, right? So that's probably you. So if I'm looking at my inbox, which I have to check because there could be something really important to those first three, if I don't know you, you're already down at number 14. So if you're number 14, let's take a look at my inbox for a second. And I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but this is actually a screen grab from my old inbox. And what do you see? Well, the first thing, obviously with the underlines, you can see where I'm going with this, but we don't necessarily look at the subject lines like we used to, because every inbox that I have, whether it's Gmail, Outlook, or even my phone, there's a preview of the first 10 to 15 words. My eyes are drawn to that. Our eyes are drawn to that. Subconsciously, we're looking at those and saying, all right, is this email here to help me, or is it here to sell me? And I'll tell you what, when you see I wanted to, I'd wanted to, I'd love to, those types of things. Remember that last slide where you as an unknown potential vendor are number 14? If it looks from the first 10 words that you're making it about yourself, which is I wanted to language, or I was curious, or I've sent a couple of notes, which are the crazy guilt trips that, frankly, thanks for the reminder why I didn't open your last email. You've made it about yourself. So if you were at 14 and you start with that, guess where you stay? Number 14, right? So what do you have to do? Well, first of all, you're going to need to focus on those first 10 words to be something that's relevant to those things that I care about in priority order: my team, my customers, and my prospects. So let me lay on the 3 rules that I want you to think about in your email outreaches. Number 1, again, when we're optimizing the beginnings of those, I personally would suggest you get rid of anything that is I language or we language. Because again, if you're number 14 and you start with that, you've made it about yourself and you stay at number 14 and you get a select all delete. Number 2 and 3 really go hand in hand. Number 2 is making your emails personalized and valuable. By personalized and valuable, what I mean is this something that's going to help me? And the personalization part is when I read an email, there's something about knowing that that email was actually meant just for me. There's something about it where I see an email that looks like it could have been sent to any one of 500 people that is basically a, whoa, 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 this is here to sell me instead of help me. So make it personalized. What is something that makes this email immediately evident that it's there to help me and that it was only sent to me? And then this third one about being a giver, again, valuable is being a giver, but I'm actually an advocate for not selling in your outreaches and instead being helpful and building trust and building a relationship with your potential customers. Give, give, give. I had one customer or one vendor of mine from my last role, their whole mantra in their outreaches to me was to just be helpful. They sent me an SDR salary study the day after I had posted salary or SDR roles on my website. They had sent me a board deck that CROs were using to prepare for their next board meeting right after the end of a close. That was kind of a template. Super useful, had nothing to do with them, but after getting those emails, the first thing I did is go, all right, who are these guys? And they had built up enough trust with me, and they could see that I was engaging in their content through their email tracking, so that when they called, guess what phone call I actually answered? It was the one that had built up enough of a relationship with me, that knew who I was and was helpful to me, that made me want to reciprocate. So no more I's or we's, make it personalized and valuable, and be a giver. Okay, so let's keep going. We're on number 2 now, which is we as human beings make all of our decisions in the feeling and emotion center of our brain and only use logic to back it up. And what does that mean? Well, when I see people leading with ROI, leading with data, as it turns out, logic is actually polarizing. If you've got a preconceived feeling-based decision in terms of which way you are swaying, oftentimes you will use logic to reinforce that decision. Meaning, if you see something that supports your argument, you will immediately classify it in your brain as another argument you can make to support the feeling decision or the way that you're leaning. If that logic actually goes counter to that decision or leaning that you have in your feeling part of your brain, you'll actually create a counter argument and use that to support your preconceived decision or leaning that you have that, again, are driven by feelings and emotions. Let's tell you a couple of stories, and hopefully this will solidify with you. Number 1, this is a super interesting story. It was a research study that was done by a guy named Martin Lindstrom, where he brought 2,080 smokers into a lab and wanted to see the impact of cigarette warning labels on the way that they think about the habit that they have. So These 2,080 people would come into the lab, they would show them the cigarette warning label. And it's not these pretty nice ones, the clean ones like you see here. They were kind of using the gross ones that you'd see in the Philippines, or, that like charred lungs and teeth coming out. Well, they would show them the cigarette warning label. And sure enough, all of these people would look at that and say, gosh, yeah, you know what? I need to quit smoking. It's killing me. I need to make a change. But here's the thing. Martin would then put them in what's called an fMRI machine, which is a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, which actually lights up and can see what is going on in the human brain while they're making decisions. We've actually gotten to the point of the neuroscience community to where they can actually pinpoint what is going on in the brain during decision making. So he would hook them up to the fMRI machine, show them another cigarette warning label, and what do you think happened? Amazingly enough, in each of their brains, their craving center would go off. In other words, the cigarette warning labels were reminding them subconsciously of their desire to have another cigarette. Basically, what was happening is that the cigarette warning labels, which are very logical and making a very strong argument for why they should stop doing what they're doing and do something different, had the opposite impact because their brain was already pre-wired to desire the cigarettes. So what does that mean in terms of a B2B selling perspective? Well, let's take a look at your NASCAR slides or your logo slides. And if you don't know, they call a NASCAR slide because if you think about NASCAR racing, the cars are all covered in logos. So this is your logo slide. But if you think about many of the presentation choreographies that I've seen from people, they typically start with a mission statement, like we as a company believe in whatever. And then slide number 2 is oftentimes awards and recognitions. We've been recognized by Forrester, and we are up in the top right quadrant of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, or whatever it's called. Number 3, a lot of times, is a map that has all of your locations on it. Like, we have a location in Singapore. I know you don't, but we think it's pretty cool. Slide number 4, a lot of times, is your product slide, right? That's like, here's the products that we have. And then oftentimes there's a circle that goes around that says solutions. And then slide number 5 oftentimes looks like this. It's a logo slide. And it's something that you take great pride in, right? That you want to show off that you've got companies that people have actually heard of that are using your products, technology, services already. But here's what happens. When we think about the Martin Lindstrom, the smoking, and the fact that cigarette warning labels oftentimes actually do the opposite of what they intend to, this slide oftentimes will do the opposite of what you intend to. And here's how it works. Let's imagine that you're presenting this slide to 10 people, 5 of which are leaning in your direction, which is great. You present this slide, those 5 people are likely, their brain is looking at it going, all right, if they're good enough for these companies, it must be good enough for us. I'm going to use this. I'm going to file that. But what about the people that are not in your camp? They're going to look at this and say one of probably 2 or 3 things. Number 1, they might say, gosh, we're going to be a real small fish in a big pond. I mean, these are really big companies, and I'm afraid we're going to get lost. Or they might look at this and say, gosh, they're spread all over the place. I see a CPG company, a tech company, an apparel company. Gosh, do they even know or have focus on our vertical? So they're actually taking the same slide that you are so proud of, that you could not wait to show off, and they're using it against you. And then there's that one person in the corner that's like, oh, cool, they're working with shake weight. They must be awesome, right? But besides the point, again, think about this idea that your logic can often polarize an audience, and instead we need to be telling stories. And I know this might sound crazy, but the greatest choreography that I've seen, that I've imparted not only in the book, but the way that we taught all of our sellers in my previous companies, is to follow the presentation choreography that reality makeover TV shows use. And I know, again, that might sound crazy, but here's a picture from Queer Eye on Netflix. If you haven't seen that before, it's fantastic. I highly recommend it. But shows like Restaurant Impossible, The Biggest Loser, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, reality makeover TV shows use a choreography that you might want to think about using in your own B2B sales presentations. And here's what I mean. What happens in each one of these? Well, Queer Eye specifically, what they do is they go into a situation where the individual has raised their hand, like they volunteered to be on the show. It's not like the guys were walking down the street going, wow, you're an abominable mess. You need to have us fix you. They actually raise their hand, right? And when they go, and that's very similar to your sales presentations, right? It's not like you're barging in the conference room or Zoom bombing people and showing up on their Zooms and going, hey, we're here to present. They volunteered, right? It's probably on their calendar. So same exact thing so far. The first thing that these guys do is that they align around what the current situation is. Like, why are you investing the time to have us in here? And they, while they get into that conversation on Queer Eye, these guys are being authentic. They're being themselves. They're being transparent. They're disarming the participant by being themselves. They're not there to be Johnny salesperson. They're there to build relationships and build trust. So that's something that we probably should consider doing ourselves. How do we build transparency and disarm the buyer at the beginning? But here's the thing. In each one of these shows, they then think about why they're in there and what that customer or prospect communicated to them is the purpose of volunteering their time to listen to your talk. And they begin to show them how their problem could potentially be bigger than they thought it was. Or they begin to point out things that maybe they didn't recognize that were problems that they have. I remember episode 1 on Queer Eye is a guy named Tom Jackson. And one of the things that Jonathan, the guy with long hair here, said to him is, wow, your toenails are really, really long. You could climb a tree with those things. So, you know, that's not one of the things that Tom Jackson talked about as being a problem, but certainly it contributes to the situation. And you know, he had this nasty lazy boy chair. He didn't point that out as a problem, but these guys are very quick to point out how that actually creates a brand for him that makes it really hard for him to be able to have people over and to have the relationships that he's seeking, right? So again, this whole conversation has been about the hero, the participant. In this case, it's Tom Jackson, going through and showing him what his current issues are and maybe the ones that he hasn't seen. They back it up with data. They back it up with emotion. So the data actually plays a role. They need to justify and back up the reasons that they're thinking the way they are. And then they talk about what their plan's going to be and how they're going to address it. In your situation, shouldn't you be thinking of it the same way? So instead of starting with you, I mean, imagine these reality makeover TV shows where the first 15 minutes of every episode is the Fab Five here, or Robert Irvine on Restaurant Impossible, or the trainers on The Biggest Loser, spending the first 15 minutes talking about how great they are and how many people they've helped, and a slide that has pictures of all the people that they've helped. It would be like, gosh, this is the most boring show of all time, and it's all about them. Same thing with your presentations. When you're starting by making it all about yourself, you're turning people off and you're driving them to think about the other things that they have to do. So this is a simple diagram to just think about in terms of reordering your slides to be able to tell a better story, or reordering your argument that you're going to make. I use this approach for pretty much everything that I talk about, is to start from A to B, where A is the customer's current state. So start there in all of your presentations, finish with their potential future state, which theoretically should include you. And in the middle should be all about teaching them about their current state and how that really is no longer sustainable. If you just think about it in terms of this in a simple way, it not only tells a great story, but it compels the participant, your prospects, your customers to action. All right, now last but not least is number 3, which is transparency sells better than perfection. And you probably wouldn't be surprised that I would share this, but I think especially in the times that we're in, this is more important than ever. Right now, when buyers are faced with a lot of challenges around reducing their discretionary spend, extending their runway on the essentials, and reducing risk, that they've got lots of things to focus on. And if you're creating friction in the buying journey and making it hard for buyers to engage, to evaluate, to decide, to sign the contract, to implement, guess what? Your product, service, technology, whatever it is, falls down to the bottom of the priority list. Part of that, a big part of that, is this idea that transparency sells better than perfection in terms of helping the buyer have to do less homework, making it easier for them to make a confident decision. So the point around this is what I talked about earlier, and that, like, why do you think that you read reviews and why they're so pervasive in everything we do, buy, and experience today? 96% of us look at reviews before we make a purchase of substance that we haven't bought before. And the amazing thing about it, though, when we think about transparency, is that 82% of us And that's actually data as of about 3 years ago. So it's probably even higher today. The way we're wired, we go right past the 5-star reviews and go right to the negatives. 82% of us do that, 4 out of 5. And when a product's review score, the average is between a 4.2 and a 4.5, those products actually sell at a higher rate than products at any other average star rating. And what that means is 4.2 actually will sell better than a product that's got nothing but perfect 5.0 scores. Now, obviously that skews a little different based on what industry you're selling, like children's products skew a little bit higher, books skew a little higher, some other things skew a little lower. But the point is that imperfection sells better than perfection, and that we need to embrace our flaws because we're all wired as human beings to want to see that first and hear that first. And that's why we should be leading with it. So, a great example of that is to think about in the B2C world is IKEA, where IKEA doesn't hide the fact that when you walk into the store, you're going to have a hard time finding what you're looking for. Once you do, there's not going to be any salesperson around to help you find what you're to help you out. You're going to have to write down the code or take a picture of it with your phone, because the plan is that you're going to go down to the warehouse yourself and find the boxes, roll them onto a cart that miraculously doesn't have brakes. You're going to jam them into the back of your car Tetris style. You're going to drive home with an injury or two. And when you get home, you thought that maybe you left all the fun at the store. Not quite. Wait till you open the box. There's 150 parts and no words on the work instructions. And once you F-bomb your way through that assembly, what do you end up probably doing? Saying, gosh, we should have bought the end tables with this bedroom set. IKEA, the #1 furniture retailer in the world for 9 straight years. And the experience is horrible. But the point is that they don't hide any of that. They don't pretend to be full service. They don't pretend that they're going to deliver it to your house assembled and help you feng shui your living room or whatever it is. They tell the world, listen, we're going to give up certain things so we can be great at our core. And our core is giving you modern Scandinavian design furniture that you didn't pay much for. So it's time for us to think about that in all of our businesses. What are we giving up to be great at our core? What is our modern Scandinavian design furniture that you're not paying much for? And what is your, find it, pick it, pack it, roll it, jam it, and assemble it? And I think all of our organizations have that. I know in my last company as a chief revenue officer, I was going into an apparel company right at a time where our biggest competitor, who they were also evaluating, had just released a new product offering that not only did we not have, but it wasn't even on our roadmap. And so instead of hiding that or hoping that they don't find out, instead, I started with it and said, listen, if this is going to be an important component to your evaluation and something you absolutely need, we're probably not the right company for you right now. So let us know. We can save you a lot of time and save your team a lot of time and save my team a lot of time on working something that we know we can't win. What ended up happening after exchanging some more conversation there is that this company we went through a whole sales cycle in 6 weeks in what typically was a 6-month sales cycle, and they turned out to be a fantastic reference as well. So what you're going to find is when you do it this way, you speed sales cycles, you increase win rates, you work deals that you should be working. And if you're going to lose, they always say lose fast. This is the best way to do it, while also making it really hard on your competitors to compete against you. So remember that transparency sells better than perfection. So where do I go to figure out what my flaws are and what potentially I should be leading with? Well, I want you to think about this. Your buyers are doing a lot of work when it comes to making a purchase. And Gartner, which was CEB back in 2017, they had actually done a research study that said, buyers, where do you actually spend your time during evaluations? As it turns out, only 39% of the buyer's time is spent talking to you, talking to your competitors, or talking to their internal buying groups. That 39 is the 22 plus the 17 here. The other 61% of the time is spent doing other stuff, getting at the stuff that they cannot get from you. And what does that mean? It's checking references, it's talking to analysts, it's back channeling you. There's a couple here at the bottom that I want you to pay really close attention to. If you're in the tech space, and you don't know what your g2.com score is or your trust radius score is, and what customers are saying about you, both positive and negative, that's a great source to be able to start to craft your language. The last one, Glassdoor. Let me tell you why this is important. Number one is if you go to Google right now, actually, why don't you wait about 5 more minutes because we're almost done here, but afterwards, Google your company in terms of just write, what is it like to work with my company? Not at, but with. Buyers are doing that. They want to predict what their experience is going to be like. They go to Google and go, what's it like to work with blank? Guess what comes up more often than not? If you've got reviews on Glassdoor today, what comes up more often than not is Glassdoor at the first result, even before your own company's results. And oftentimes it's got a rating snippet that shows the review score of current and former employees that are leaving on that site, talking about what it's like to work in your organization. Buyers find that to be really helpful in that they're not just buying your product, services, and technology, they're buying your people. They're buying a relationship, and they're trying to predict what it's going to be like to work with you and your people. So go do that homework. And what is amazing is that when you start to lead with those things and your customers start to do their homework, that 61%, guess what? When they find that it matches up, they won't feel the need to do much homework. That 61% is not a foregone conclusion. And when you lead with transparency, the 61% shrinks, and that is where your sales cycle difference gets made. And oftentimes it is dramatic, the shrinking of sales cycles, and especially right now, make it easy for your customers to buy. I would really suggest that you give them all the information they need to make a decision, and that includes both the pros and the cons. And with that, I want to leave you with a word that I think should be your mantra around this transparent concept. And it's coined by supermodel Tyra Banks. And that the word is flossom. And what she talks about here is that we should all embrace our flaws, but know that we are still awesome. And that is exactly how we should be thinking about in terms of our messaging. I'm not telling any of you to go out in the world today and go, hey, this is why we suck. No, you're flossom. There are certain things that are not great, that might not work in all environments, that might be features or functions that you're missing. Again, think IKEA. But here is our core. Here's what we're trying to be great at. And if that aligns with what you're trying to accomplish, we could have a great relationship here. So be flossom. So with that, we've talked about the 3 things that drive buyers in the way that they buy, the way they decide, and they prioritize. We are resistant to be sold to. So we need to be givers. Get rid of the I's and we's and be personalized and valuable. Build relationships. Number 2, we make all of our decisions in the feeling and emotion center of our brain, and logic actually polarizes us. So when you're leading with ROI, ROI is not believable. Or if I'm leaning towards you, maybe I do use it. But to tell a story that injects emotion, think reality makeover TV shows and the way they choreograph their episodes. At the end of each one of those episodes, everybody's celebrating and the relationships are so strong, and that's what you want in your sales cycles. And lastly, remember that transparency sells better than perfection. That when we present as though we are perfect, our brains are wired to seek out the negative and try to predict what our experience is going to be. And if all we get is 5-0 speak from you, we go do our homework elsewhere, and often we don't come back. And often that's why our sales cycles get to be so long. So be flossom, embrace your messaging, position yourself as a 4.2 to a 4.5, and you'll find that sales cycles speed up, your win rates will go up, and you'll be working deals that you should be winning anyway. So thank you so much. I certainly hope that was helpful. I encourage you to reach out if you've got questions. I would love to engage with you. You can connect with me through my website, which is transparencysale.com, or through LinkedIn. If you want to follow me there, if you're going to connect with me on LinkedIn, just tell me where you heard me. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I do share a bunch of stuff there, LinkedIn, Twitter, and then I've got a blog on Transparency Sale that you're certainly welcome to sign up for. So thanks for having me. Again, I hope that was super helpful, and hang in there. This too shall pass. Thank you.